Did you know that 70% of businesses fail within the first 5 years? How do you avoid joining this business graveyard? Learn from other business owners who have overcome major challenges and gone on to run thriving businesses on the I Survived Business Podcast. If you're an aspiring or active business owner, tune in now to hear their can't-miss inspiring stories.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with I Survived Business Podcast. My guest is Andrew Mellen. He's the founder and CEO of Declutter Your Show. He's the author of Calling Bullsh on Busy. So we're going to talk about how to help people, I guess, become less overwhelmed and not so busy that their head's falling off every day. So welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Richard. It's great to be here.
So, Andrew, tell me a bit about your background, how you got into decluttering and simplifying your life. What led you to that?
Sure. Like many things certainly in my life, and maybe in your listeners' lives, you can relate to this. This was not a career path for me. I worked in the theater. My first career was working in the theater as a director and a producer and an actor. I started as an actor. And 27 years ago, I got laid off from a theater and I got a gig co-producing an award ceremony at the Kennedy Center. One of our awardees was a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and I went to his office to get some photographs and they were a mess. So in the process of pulling things together for that presentation at the Kennedy Center, he and his wife asked me if I wanted to organize their photographs for them. And I said, sure, that would be, sure. I need a job. I'm moving back to New York. It sounds great. I'm happy to do that. And we made a date for me to go to work. The day before I was supposed to go to work, their assistant called up, said something's come up. We need to reschedule. This happened 3 times. And on the third time, which was really the 4th time, they said to me, when we're ready to proceed, we'll get back in touch with you. So I, in fact, never went to work with them. But over those 4 months, I told everybody I met, hey, I've got this amazing gig. I'm going to create a comprehensive photographic archive for a Nobel Peace Prize winner. And that led to other people referring me to people who did need organizing help. So a friend of mine referred me to her accountant. I built a filing system for the accountant. Then the accountant started referring me to clients of hers, and people would show up on my doorstep literally with a duffel bag full of receipts saying, I haven't filed my taxes in 5 years. I've got letters in here from the IRS. I'm freaked out. I don't know what to do, but I'm really scared. And can you make sense out of this paperwork before something really bad happens? And I would organize the receipts. I'd put everything into QuickBooks. I'd give it to the accountant. The accountant would file their taxes, and they would tell all their friends, you'll never believe I gave this guy a pile of garbage. He turned it into my tax returns. He's a genius. And they would say, who is this guy? I need somebody just like that. And that was how my second career began. This was never a planned strategic move for me.
Well, why do you think that you're able to help people get organized and these people weren't able to help themselves, like the psychology of?
Well, I think I have a certain detached or dispassionate approach to things. I don't think I'm a robot, and I don't think that I think I have a high EQ. And at the same time, first of all, it's not my stuff, so I don't really have a horse in the race. It's easier to make sense out of things when you're just trying to solve a puzzle, right? Like, what is this like? Oh, this is another grocery receipt. This is another shipping and postage receipt. This is another airplane receipt. So you're just playing a massive game of concentration. At least that was the very beginning of the work, right? Was what is this like? Put them all together, add them all up, and then the accountant can file your tax returns. So that was the very genesis of it. But I have, as a director, when I was working in the theater, you are solving a different puzzle. It's a more visual puzzle. It's also a verbal puzzle. The playwright gives you a script, and you work together with designers, actors, musicians to create something out of basically a word map that is in a book. And you need to make it 3-dimensional so that the audience actually has an experience when they come to the theater. So I do think that my training and my experience in solving puzzles, if you will, if making sense out of things that might seem disparate or random and finding the connections, is something that I am both skilled at and probably have a natural inclination towards.
And because it's not your stuff, the emotional component is not there. There's probably guilt, I would guess.
Guilt, shame, embarrassment. Yeah. There's lots of flavors of why people are stuck. Often it is shame, embarrassment, and there's fear, anxiety, which then manifests itself as stress. And when you're confronted with stress, you're going to choose to fight or flee. And if there's not a clear enough reason why you should fight this battle at this time, most people will choose to leave rather than dig in.
I guess I know you're not, but it'd be funny if you were like a secret hoarder. Someone went to your house and it was like a horror. I know it would be. But...
Yeah, I mean, I eat my own dog food. And even though I just said this thing about not having a horse in the race, even in my own home, I do have a horse in that race. I like order. I'm not a minimalist. I have things and I know where everything is and I can find it in 10 or 15 seconds. It's not hard to find things. I created or discovered the organizational triangle, which are basically 3 rules. One home for everything, like with like, something in, something out. This is the basis of my first book, Unstuff Your Life. One home for everything and like with like are the 2 legs of the triangle that we use to get organized. Something in, something out is the 1 leg of the triangle we use to stay organized. So one home for everything means everything has one home, only one home. Where you keep your keys can be different from where I keep my keys, but your keys have a home, my keys have a home. They can only be one of 2 places at any given moment, either in our hands unlocking something or in their home.
Yeah, like with my wife that and my daughters, they lose things a lot. Like I tell them, my wallet, I only put it in one spot. I will not put it anywhere else. My keys, so I never lose them.
Right,
but they don't seem to want to hear that.
Well, look, I mean, you have a primary relationship with them, so we could get into the dynamics of how dispassionately you're sharing a piece of advice with them, or if you're scolding them or cajoling them in some way to get them to change their behavior, right? Chances are, for most people, and I don't know your wife or your daughters, if they're not paying attention in the moment, if they are distracted, if they are attempting to multitask, they're not paying attention to where they're setting something down. It's not like, I'm sure they're smart enough to remember if they would establish one home, where that home is and to always put things back in it. For whatever reason, they don't. It could be because it's in opposition to you, and it could be that they don't care, right?
No,
it's hard to know about the personal dynamic.
Telling them, no, you're right. If it's me telling them, they're like, leave me alone, But
if I told them, if they met me at a workshop and I shared the organizational triangle with them, they could say, "Oh my God, that's genius and it's so simple. We should try that at home." And you would be thinking in the back of the room, "I've been saying this for 20 years, but sure, now it sounds like it's new."
Mm-hmm. I've heard that exactly. Yeah, on certain things with myself. Yep. Yeah, that's hilarious. So, what do people come to you for? Again, is it tax receipts? Is it just I'm a mess, help me organize, or is it my business is not systematized? Like, what kind of consulting do you find yourself doing lately?
So there's a fork in the road between B2B, business to business, and B2C, business to consumer work that I do. My first book, Unstuff Your Life, when we're talking about clutter, it often is on the B2C side of the fork, right? It's typically, the business began for me with a B2B light. These were solopreneurs and entrepreneurs that were coming to me with problems, and I was working in people's homes and I was working in people's offices, and it was primarily around setting up systems, both organizing and decluttering. And as the work grew and I developed both a vocabulary and an expertise, I started to be invited into more business, like larger businesses, bigger than single person shops or, SMEs, but being invited into companies like the New York Mets or Goldman Sachs or American Express or the Metropolitan Museum of Art to help them solve larger problems that were both personnel issues around how teams are going to share space and keep track of things, as well as how we could eliminate time productivity bottlenecks and points of friction. So it was a natural evolution as my work developed. More people and businesses in different ways were drawn to, he seems to solve problems effectively, efficiently. He's able to identify these bottlenecks or these points of friction and smooth them out or eliminate them. This could be useful for us in this application.
So what do you see the biggest sources of pushback when you're trying to help an organization or a person? Where's the resistance come from?
Well, if we're thinking about organizations, it's not unlike the story that we just talked about with you and your wife and your kids, right? If it's the CEO that thinks these people that work for me have a problem, I don't have a problem, they have a problem. And there isn't a culture of innovation or easily adoptability. If there's a culture of blame or resistance and people, they're not aligned with a bigger mission than a paycheck, there's typically resistance to change because people, they just want to be able to come and go and not have to really be challenged personally or professionally. So, I mean, I would say that that's probably the biggest issue on the B2B side is, for shorthand, we'll just say a less than ideal culture, right? A crappy culture, okay. A culture of blame, of recrimination, of passive-aggressive comparisons and competition. On the B2C side, it goes back to shame and trauma, anxiety, stress, overwhelm. It could be some neurodivergencies where maybe there's ADHD or other things where some executive functioning in the ways that we might think about it for neurotypical people. There's some challenges grasping concepts, or not necessarily grasping the concepts, but executing in a neurotypical way. And so they've never been invited, perhaps, to take a set of tools and use them to get similar results, but perhaps arranging them differently, if that makes sense, right? I mean, if the sum total of the application of the tools, whether we connect them ABC or ACB or AMF, still yields a positive movement towards solution, does it really matter? But if it's being presented as the only way to do it is ABC, learn ABC, and for whatever reason, connecting the dots that way doesn't make sense or doesn't feel good, there'll be resistance. And they might be trying to hack it themselves, thinking, God, if I could just do ACB, I bet I could get the same results. But again, if there's no support or encouragement to do that, and for lack of a better term, permission, then they'll just sit in the place of nothing works, right? And what we know to be true is when people start to speak in absolutes, their chances are they're telling one of their 200 lies.
200 lies? What's that?
Oh, the average adult tells 200 lies a day.
A day? No.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to be clear, right, 2/3 of them will never come out of your mouth. It's just garbage that we tell ourselves. But 1/3 of them will come out of your mouth. It could be something like, hey, Richard, I'm so sorry to bother you. Now, if I was really sorry to bother you, I wouldn't be bothering you. But I say that as if it means something. And what I really mean is, Richard, whatever you're doing to me is less important than what I want you to be doing. So I'm going to interrupt you and get your attention and bring it to what I want you to be doing in this moment. More than whatever it is that you think you should be doing or want to be doing, I want you to do what I want you to do in this moment. I want your attention. That would be the direct way to say it.
When you work with people and you accomplish this change, and they let you, they don't fight you to death. Does it last? Or do they go recidivist and everything falls apart and they're buried in papers or buried in whatever within 3 months after you leave?
I will say that while there's sometimes, we could even say often, some recidivism, it's not exactly chutes and ladders where they're back to the very beginning of the game. Once
I'm not blaming you.
Oh, no, I'm not feeling challenged. I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm with you. I'm gonna break this down for you, right?
Yeah, I would think just before you start, like, human nature is probably a huge gravitational force. But good.
Yeah, it might sometimes be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 1 step back, 4 steps forward, 2 steps back. And the baseline keeps elevating. Once these behaviors have been adopted, the techniques employed, it's hard to go back to just throwing your keys on the kitchen counter, because if you've worked directly with me or you've spent any time with me, you will literally hear my voice in your head saying, Richard, that's not where your keys go. What are you doing? Put your keys back where they belong. You'll be able to find them if you put them back where they belong. And right now you're setting yourself up for failure and disappointment. And we both know you don't want that to happen. Eventually, you'll internalize that enough that you'll say it to yourself. What am I doing? This is clearly, I was checked out for a minute. I came into the house, the phone was ringing, or I had to pee, or something was up, and I just threw my keys down. Old bad behavior. And now that I'm back in my body, I remember, that's a recipe for disaster. Go find my keys, put them back where they belong. So the corrective behavior will be easier and easier in that way, that habits, once the new habit is formed, it will feel weirder to not do it. You might still do it, but it will feel out of joint, and you will likely correct your behavior quicker, right? So that even if you backslide, you won't go back as far, and your recovery will be quicker. Right. It's like muscle memory in the gym, right? I mean, if you go to the gym every day or every week, and then you take a couple of weeks off, you might not be able to pick up the same pounds that you picked up 3 or 4 weeks ago, but it won't be long before you are back where you were, and then, going beyond it.
Okay. Have you incorporated, is it necessary to incorporate like any Marie Kondo stuff, throwing a lot of stuff away? Or is it more organizing does the trick?
Well, yeah, I mean, I find that limiting things to what sparks joy in my life, I would be a minimalist if it was only the things that spark joy in my life, right? I mean, I've expanded that definition, and to be fair to me and to be fair to Marie, who I don't know, right? But I've been a professional organizer since she was a toddler. So, she has a lot more visibility than I do, but me and many of my colleagues have been doing this work for a lot longer than she has been doing it, which is, I mean, it's no shade on her. I mean, clearly she tapped into the zeitgeist and gathered everybody's attention and became a phenomenon, which is awesome. A rising tide lifts all boats. So in no way am I throwing shade on her. And I'm just clarifying, sparking joy is a little narrow for me. I like to think of, does it make my life more comfortable? Does it make my life more convenient? Does it make my life more beautiful? Because my toilet brush, right, doesn't spark joy. It's very functional and useful. And I would much rather use a toilet brush than stick my hand in the bowl of the toilet, even with a pair of rubber gloves on. So I'm going to keep the toilet brush. But if you said, like, does that spark joy? I would say, no, it does not spark joy.
Right, I got you. It'd be funny if you told people I'm a minimalist trying to live life to the fullest in a maximal way.
I think of myself as an essentialist, right? I like things that, again, comfort, convenience, or beauty. I have art on the walls in my apartment, and I mean, it doesn't serve a purpose other than it makes my life richer and engages my imagination and is beautiful, but it's not the same as a plunger or a blender, right? Those are functional tools that live in my home as well.
Have you coached people that have become minimalists, and does it help them or does it make them unhappy? Like, have you seen examples of that, or have you coached people that are hoarders and they really have a psychological hard time with letting anything go?
Oh, yeah. I have worked with, I wouldn't say many, but I've worked with more than a few people who have hoarding tendencies and hoarding disorder. Yes. And again, if they are interested in change, then they can improve. There's a degree of pathology. I'm not a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist, so I can't do clinical work with them in that sense, right? But I can coach them on behavioral changes. They will need additional support from somebody around the pathology because that's not my wheelhouse. And on the other side, for people who want to be minimalist, I mean, I have people in my community and in among my students and people who work with me. There are people who are minimalists, aspire to be minimalists. It all comes down, for me, to this idea of, is the focus, and this is one of those things about Marie Kondo's work, is the focus on the stuff or is the focus on you? And in my world and in my approach to this, I'm interested in changing how you think, feel, and interact with stuff. I'm not as interested in taming the clutter. The clutter will get tamed, but if you think about it, if you don't change, if your relationship with things doesn't change, it's this pair of shoes or that pair of shoes, but it's still a pair of shoes that's getting your attention. And if we think about in the bigger picture of your life, how much time, we're here for a limited amount of time, how much time do you want to spend in a one-sided relationship with an inanimate object rather than in intimate, dynamic relationships with people, with plants, with companion animals, experiences? In my experience, in my life, the juice comes from relationships with things, I'll call them things in a reductive way, that reciprocate my affection. So pouring all of my affection into my computer desktop or my mobile phone, the phone is not reciprocating my affection. It's not saying, oh, the way that Andrew holds me in his right hand is so tender and gentle. I'm so lucky that he brought me home from the iPhone store. It's not happening.
Okay. As people go through the process with you, what do you notice about them psychologically? Like, do they reach certain common milestones, or do they have points where they freak out, or they don't like it, or they resist it, or I don't know, like difficult points in the journey, or is it pretty smooth?
It's similar and not exactly like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, right? I think most people, if we think about a bell curve, there's some resistance, there's an attachment to your own beliefs and your own way of doing things, even if they are inefficient or ineffective. They're still what you know. And as you adopt new behavior, momentum starts to build. I often say failure breeds failure and success breeds success. So the more successful you are in changing your behavior, adopting these new habits, there's momentum that is built up, and you become more enthusiastic of, oh, I actually do see clear surfaces in my home. I do feel better. I'm less stressed out. I'm less anxious. I don't worry as much. I know where to find the things that I'm looking for. I'm not wasting time. This is awesome. I want more of it. And it tends to build on itself. It's so as we think about that bell curve, and then on the back side of it, as you're descending it's things are working. So there's less friction as you're going down the curve. It's like, oh, and I can do it here and I can do it there, and look at this, and that's even better. And now I can do this, and all of those things that I had been procrastinating on or putting off, I have time to dedicate to them. And I have less resistance to it because I have greater both confidence in my own abilities, and I have greater competence as well. I can feel the sense of, if not mastery, at least proficiency.
Okay. So now that you've helped a lot of businesses and people with this, like, what's next? Is it just, helping a lot more businesses and people? Or are there new things that you're learning to take people to a higher level? Maybe after this initial coaching, there's something else that they need to do?
I would say that there are certainly other things that I would like to do as the business continues to grow. Some of those, I don't know what they are. Some of it is just about scale, right? I'd like to be, instead of being in rooms talking to 1,000 people at a time, I'd like to be on a stage talking to 10 or 15 or 20,000 people at a time, just so that we can impact more people quickly. So part of it is that. And then Calling Bullshit on Busy was an outgrowth of Unstuff Your Life. I mean, Unstuff Your Life, I published first in 2010 it came out, and we're just working on the second edition of it now. So that was about clutter. And then I started to see, particularly on the B2B side, this time management thing, and that was the genesis. And again, I'm not throwing shade on my friends and colleagues who produce books every year. I really didn't want to just keep books coming into the marketplace so that I could sell more things. It felt antithetical to who I am. So I wanted to make sure that I had something worthwhile to say before I wrote my next book. And so that it took a while to come out with Calling Bullshit on Busy. And that really addresses the 8 deadly time thieves as I've experienced them, particularly in the B2B world. And that is overcommitting, interruptions, poor planning, multitasking, email, meetings, social media, and procrastination. And so those are the most common issues or causes of lost time and fractured productivity. So I wanted to take those on because I was recognizing patterns that interruptions is probably the worst offender. And procrastination is probably the most personal piece of narrative that we tell ourselves that keeps us from doing the things that we say is important.
Okay. So you have a program that help executives and other people through these, to minimize the effects of these 8 time wasters in their life.
Yeah, I have the book, and I also have a training that I do for businesses around this. And I would like to, so when we think about the growth of the business, besides just scaling up larger, is really being able to develop more enterprise level solutions on the B2B side to really address culture. Because again, interruptions is typically a culture problem.
Yeah, I remember working for Intel and Motorola, and I was the new guy. But when I'd go to talk to my boss, people would come in, interrupt him. Sometimes I'd sit there for like 20 minutes. It was terrible. And he didn't stop any of it. And so I pretty much stopped going to see him because there was no point. I was like totally disrespected. I would just sit there and had to take it while people came in and just talked about garbage, and he filtered nobody.
Right. Yeah. And so being able to shift that culture so that, the best thing that he could have, other than saying not now because I'm meeting with Richard, could have been, I can give you 5 minutes and I'm setting a timer. And when the timer goes off, it's like, you're done. So if we need to keep talking, I need to get back to Richard. If we need to keep talking more than we just did, you'll need to make an appointment.
Yeah, they would have been nice, but yeah. So I remember I was scarred by this years ago.
Yeah.
What just a couple of facts or interesting, statistics around time wasting. Average time or average amount of time that people you coach waste a day, and how much does it decrease, and what do they do with this newfound productivity?
Well, let's talk about what they do with the newfound productivity, and then we can go back and pull out some stats. Typically, they will either do more work, which isn't always optimal, or they will start to, it's not that I don't believe it like I don't believe in Santa Claus, but I don't believe in work-life balance, because I think that the idea of perching yourself perfectly on a fulcrum between work and life seems an impossible place to put yourself in, and nothing is static in life. So that seems to be a fool's errand to me, to try to achieve perfect life-work balance. If you spend too much time working and we can buy you back some time, it's nice for you to be able to distribute that towards your personal life and have less stress and be able to be present for your family, for your friends, for your social activities without having something gnawing on the back of your consciousness saying, but this is all stolen time, this is borrowed time. We're just creating more time debt for ourselves. So we're enjoying this, but part of us is not even present for it because we know that we're going to have to pay back this time later to get caught up. So that's not how we want it to be, right? We want it to be that when this time is reapplied or redistributed, it gets to go where it wants to go without any strings attached to it or any narrative attached to it. You're fully present for whatever you're doing in the moment. You don't have part of your brain keeping score or keeping count.
Okay. And then how much time do your coachees win back on average?
The target is 4 to 10 hours a week.
That's significant. It's a lot. That can actually work out 3 times a week. That can do all kinds of stuff,
Yeah, the goal is at least an hour a day.
And what do you have specific things that you suggest these people fill that time with? Or do you leave it to them? Or do you workshop with them? Hey, if we get you back this hour a day, what are you going to do with it?
Certainly that is a part of the work so that they have something to look forward to. So we certainly want to brainstorm when you get some free time, how are you going to use it so that, again, it doesn't just there are times when it's appropriate for it to be reinvested into your work, but there are other times when that just is, again, it's a slightly unconscious or possibly it's a lazy choice to I'll just work more.
Well, what do people choose, left to their own devices? Do a lot of them choose work, or do they sleep in an hour, or what do they do at the time?
They do more volunteer work. They spend more time with their kids, more time with their partner. They pick up hobbies or activities. I don't really know what a hobby is, but they pick up activities that maybe they have neglected. That could be knitting, that could be painting, it could be music, it could be athletics, could be golfing, right? Could be tennis, could be cycling, yoga. But they start to reintegrate things that they loved doing at one time, and scarcity of time crowded out. It wasn't that they were any less interested in these activities, but other things got in front of them, and it was relatively easy in that way of a frog boiling, right? It was relatively easy in the beginning to push it off and tell yourself one of your 200 lies, as soon as I get some time, I'll go back to this. And then that distance just grew and grew and grew until it felt like it was an insurmountable hurdle to get back into doing something. So part of what they do is find their way back, and they start to dismantle that hurdle or that mountain of resistance or story that there isn't enough time or this would be too hard to pick up again, so that they can actually start to find their way back into those kinds of activities.
Have you run into people that have too much free time and that's why they're a mess?
I would say they have too much unstructured time. I don't know if I would frame it that way. And I'm not trying to be overly semantic about it, right? But I think if money is not an obstacle to somebody being able to do whatever they want to do, so that they have a certain amount of time freedom and privilege to choose what they want to do, and they are disconnected from their values, they might be more idle than they would want to be. Some people I think are perhaps not very curious about what's going on in the world, or they're not particularly curious about much. That's a different, I don't want to necessarily call it an ailment, but it's a different condition. I think if you have many interests, and because nothing is overly compelling, you might be immobile because you don't know how to prioritize. You're not prioritizing because there's a limited amount of time. You're prioritizing because you want to do something that has high value impact for you rather than something that doesn't, but you don't necessarily have a system or a method for evaluating, I have all this time. Should I spend it doing this or should I spend it doing that? And if I spend it doing this, how much time should I spend on that before I pivot to this? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Got it. What are some resources for listeners? And let's say they're intrigued by what you're saying. They want help. What should their first or second step be?
Head to my website, probably, to andrewmellen.com. Mellen is Mellen. And there's ways to get in touch with me there. You can always send an email to hello@andrewmellen.com. So I would send them there. And then from there, they could pick up a copy of one of my books. They could travel to my YouTube channel. They can follow me on social media. They could sign up for one of our programs. We have one-off classes that are topic specific, like a photos organizing class. We have a Calling Bullshit on Busy Time Management class. So they could take a drip delivered class, or they could take a live. We teach our 3 main programs: De-Stress Your Mess Challenge, Unstuff Your Life System, and Your Next Big Thing. All of those programs are taught live by me and some coaches, depending on the configuration of the class. And what we have found is that the live instruction provides both clear instruction and also a degree of accountability that people who are learning new behaviors would benefit from. So a one-off class, a 90-minute class that you would watch a video of and then do the homework is one thing. But if you're trying to actually build some new behavior, I have found that live instruction provides a degree of accountability so that you have a greater incentive to do the work and get the results. You can't.
Makes sense.
So yeah. So that's where I would send people. andrewmellen.com, the YouTube channel. Send an email to hello@andrewmellen.com, and we can figure out how we can support you, or you and your business, you and your family.
Well, very good, Andrew. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Now that you've heard from active business owners who have overcome serious challenges, consider implementing what you find useful to help your business not only survive, but thrive. Visit isurvivedbusinesspodcast.com.